Before a time when there was an abundance of military shooters, there was an abundance of World War II shooters. Before Call of Duty and Medal of Honor went all modern day M4s and P99s, we were shooting Nazis with World War II era Springfield rifles. It's easy to see how the setting of World War II made for a bigger genre, spanning different mediums because of how Nazis are seen as pure, unsympathetic, genocidal evil. And I think this exemplifies why, in contrast, we don't see a lot of games set in World War I. It's a period of complicated politics, of conflicting moral divides between opposing empires, and of depressing trench warfare where soldiers who weren't in danger of being shot were at risk from diseases, lack of sleep, and ever-increasing anxiety. Therefore a period that's much harder to trivialise in entertainment, particularly with video games. And that is why Battlefield 1 doesn't feel particularly bold despite tackling this barely touched period of history. If I did do an impressions video, it could probably be summarised as it's a Battlefield game with a World War I theme rather than a Battlefield game that reflects World War I. While it's a fun game, there's an almost inescapable feeling of missed potential given the setting. So with that in mind, I began thinking of ways that games set in World War I could use the period and the reality of trench warfare to inspire more interesting gameplay than the simplistic run-of-the-mill shooty gun that Battlefield 1 seems more lenient on. As I mentioned before, the reality of World War I had soldiers on the front line more concerned about their own survival in a rotten, depressing environment than about killing the bad guys. So one game came to mind that mechanics I think could inspire a more interesting World War I game. Metal Gear Solid 3 altered the MGS stealth formula by setting it in a sprawling jungle rather than an urban environment where being aware of your whole surroundings was more important than hiding behind objects to remain unseen. Not only could you use it to your advantage to get the drop on enemies or slip by unnoticed, but to also be aware of what could harm you. A key aspect of this was also about using resources to make sure you don't die, but also stay in good condition to maximise your efficiency. A smaller bar underneath your health was your stamina gauge, where certain actions would decrease your stamina. As your stamina got lower, your performance would decrease, your health would regenerate more slowly, and your aim would shake significantly, making your shots less accurate. To regain stamina, you would have to find food by hunting animals and fruit or stealing enemy rations from their food supply. However, food can be poisonous and even deteriorate and become more and more rotten as you leave it in your inventory, even if you save the game and come back later. Bad food induced stomach aches, bullet wounds, cuts, and other incurred illnesses and injuries can be sorted out via the cure section, so long as you have the right supplies. But like any good emergent design, food that goes rotten isn't redundant as it can be used to your advantage. The game allows for a lot of choice when it comes to tactics. For instance, you can sabotage enemy weapon and food supply by blowing them up with C4 to starve enemies, then throw any food you have in your inventory at hungry guards. Rotten food can give them a stomachache, and even poisonous food can kill them a few seconds after they eat it. So what does all this have to do with World War I? Well, Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game about survival and using resources to survive, which is what most soldiers in the trenches were primarily concerned about, and that Battlefield 1 doesn't reflect outside the tradition of die, respawn and carry on. Now, imagine a team-based online multiplayer shooter set in the trenches during World War I, where you have to be mindful of both enemies in opposing trenches but also your own surroundings, where certain environments and conditions can give you infections that affect performance and even slowly kill you, requiring you to spot symptoms and treat yourself with the right supplies to prevent performance decreases or death. You also have to treat bullet wounds if shot, otherwise you will aim less accurately, walk slower, or even bleed to death. Also imagine a stamina gauge you'd have to look after by eating food and sleeping to regain, otherwise you become less able to aim accurately or naturally recover from sickness. Imagine this in a game like Verdun, a game that uses the setting of World War I and reflects it more accurately in both presentation and gameplay mechanics. Something like this enhanced with the aforementioned mechanics could make for a more dynamic way of playing if refined and balanced enough to not be too minimalized or overwhelming. Heck, Verdun's frontline modes could be made more interesting if an incentive to capture points of land was also to get more supplies to keep soldiers in top condition, while also being able to lay traps and sabotage them. Of course, it doesn't have to be extremely historically accurate or realistic, but the setting of World War I can inspire more unique dynamics in a multiplayer setting instead of playing it safe by just painting a World War I theme over a traditional shooter. Because for all the praise Battlefield 1 has been getting over its use of this unconventional setting, it seems held back by the franchise's established conventions. While the ideas I mentioned before aren't exactly marketable or appealing bullet points that you could put on the back of a game box, video games can offer way more creative liberties than what marketing or focus testers want in the AAA space. And I say this because Metal Gear Solid 3 came out over a decade ago in 2004, where the climate was less averse to risks and challenging the status quo, and in this age of games with giant budgets making publishers less willing to take risks that aren't marketable, is why Battlefield 1 feels like missed potential.